Live from Las Vegas, the Snake Sports Talk Show with Jake Silva starts right now.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is about that time on a super, some of us would maybe call a little suspicious type of Sunday. This is the Snake Sports Talk Show, wherever and however you may be watching and listening. We're live on all social media platforms, iHeartRadio, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, and Instagram. That is where you can like, follow, and subscribe onto the show to keep you up to date on future and past shows. Couple minutes from now, David Droegmeier from Locked On Chargers joining me here. And hopefully we will have Jeremy on here this morning as well, who's always up and on the case. Boy, wild card weekend has officially begun, and it could not have gotten wilder from the start to all the way to the finish on Saturday. And now we've got 3 games today and, Dallas and Tampa Bay tomorrow. But, boy, it took my breath away. I'm sure, David and I are probably going to be feeling the same way that we did from the end of Saturday. But I do want to start with this. So every coach that is here in the playoffs, you got Brian Daboll today, you've got Kyle Shanahan from yesterday, even Pete Carroll. But in the end, Kyle Shanahan was able to narrow down what San Francisco's identity is. They play really well on offense. They play vicious on defense. And all it took was the adjustment in the second half to make things work. You could never put this on paper at all with the best explanation of what the hell just happened last night. Brandon Staley, since he had been hired, has made way too many questionable calls. By the way, the Chargers had Brian Daboll in front of them, interviewed for the job, who has a relationship with Tom Telesco in the past. Yes, they've worked with each other and knows a lot about the Chargers organization. But yet Daboll did not get hired. He took the Giants job that year after. So instead of having somebody who's a journeyman in the NFL, who has the experience, who's developed a lot of players, and who's also understanding of critical situational play. No, they went with a young kid in Brandon Staley, who's big on analytics and who basically is like, we have a duty, we have a job, this is all part of the plan. Well, this plan didn't work. This plan did not work. Listen, for 40 years in this organization, there have been 2 successful coaches in my lifetime. Don Coryell and Marty Schottenheimer. Though that's it. Look, you can talk to me about the Norv Turner years all you want. But the fact that Phillip Rivers had a torn ACL in the championship game against the Patriots in the AFC, regardless of that, the Patriots and Belichick had the Chargers number. And there was no other further adjustments. You could tell me all about it. But I could tell you they were not going to get over the hump, no matter how talented that team is. 172 Pro Bowlers, and you can't get over the hump like this. You could not even make a single adjustment from the second half of play. You have a 27-point lead. Why are you hurrying up the offense? Are you purposefully trying to tire the guys out? And this is what we talked about with Staley's questionable calls. Now, I'll be honest. Here's what I thought of the hire. Okay, the Chargers had several offensive coordinators who we thought were going to be successful. Anthony Lynn, Mike McCoy. And even when they had Norv Turner, they made it to the playoffs, but yet could never get over the hump. Hell, they had the number one offense and defense, and they missed the playoffs that year. This is so Chargers-like of them because they get so close and yet find ways to make mistakes and lose it all. Brandon Staley sat all of his starters in the preseason because those preseason games are meaningless. But yet you want to play the starters all the way up until the very end against Denver, who they've been going through a rocky yet interesting ride with Russell Wilson. And it was meaningless. Absolutely meaningless. So Mike Williams ends up getting hurt. Joey Bosa starts getting hurt. And then all of a sudden, it is such brutal, horrible calls. But that's telling you a lot about what Dean Spanos and this organization has dealt with now for the last few years. Enough is enough. By Monday morning, if the Chargers fans, David and myself, if we don't end up seeing the Chargers firing Brandon Staley by Monday morning, that is a Dean Spanos problem. Spanos over the years. I mean, his parents, Alex and Faye Spanos, they are die-hard football fans. But this is a disappointment to see the team go this way. And listen, they've had talented quarterbacks all throughout the years. Dan Fouts, Doug Flutie, Jim Harbaugh. They had Drew Brees and Phillip Rivers. Now here we are with Justin Herbert, and who's getting ready to be in his payday year. And how exactly are you going to explain that to the Chargers fan base? You move from San Diego to Los Angeles in a bigger money market, which, by the way, have you heard a lot of the fans? They are not fond of the Chargers being in Los Angeles. I could have possibly saw them move to Las Vegas. Brand new city, brand new fan base. Maybe you would have made a killing from there. Because I can tell you right now, with the way that the Raiders are, I mean, good God, they were brutal since the time that Derek Carr in the last 2 games was benched and he walked off. They just know how to write their quarterbacks off, and they know how brutal that the fan base can be. But it could have been a nice destination. It could have been a nice place because San Diego was beautiful. There was no need to end up moving it away. But this was all a Dean Spanos problem. Spanos is known for not paying and for not hiring the right veteran coaches. You did this with Brian Daboll. How about let's look in the mirror and let's wake up and not do this with Sean Payton? Let's not. Sean Payton is a Super Bowl winning head coach. By the way, he took your former quarterback, Drew Brees, and won a Super Bowl with him. All because of the team's dysfunction. This is absurd. Enough is enough. Brandon Staley clearly is off his skis, and he is making such questionable calls. And don't even get me started with Joe Lombardi. I had a video talking about this. I did not like the hire since day one. Because how do you go from a ranked 7th offense with Shane Steichen and hire somebody with a ranked 24 offense with New Orleans? How do you trend backwards? This makes no sense. So if you want to change the narrative and you want to make this better for your players, for Justin Herbert, for the organization's sake, and hell, even for the Charger fan base, you need to make the right decision. It's time to start putting in a veteran coach who understands what they're doing. You had Marty Schottenheimer on a 14-2 year, and you decide to fire him the next year. Are you absolutely kidding me? And even Don Coryell, with that great of an offense, with Dan Fouts, Charlie Joyner, and Kellen Winslow, and the rest of that offense and defense, this is insane. And again, this is what makes the point, because I watched this game all the way through. Offense was just, they were clicking. Okay, Austin Eckler running the football efficiently. Why did you stop running? And at the same time, you're passing a lot more and you're making yourself more vulnerable, yet more obvious for Jacksonville to come back. And this was the largest comeback deficit in the playoffs. And of course, you embarrass Justin Herbert on national television again. So this is absolutely absurd. I cannot believe it. But it's just so Charger-like. Because no matter what, they get so close. And look, Raider fans may feel the same way. They reel you in until all of a sudden they get blown out the next week. But this is just beyond what it is. Because this has been 40, 50 years in the making with this organization. And they're so snake-bitten. Because they can't hire the right guys. They can't get the right personnel in the middle of this office. I'm telling you right now, even with Staley as a head coach, the defense didn't get better. It got worse. They can't stop the run. Now, there were times, from week 13 in the second half of play, they allowed 0 points. They got 7 sacks. They had less than 150 yards. They seemed like they were on fire. They felt like the Chargers defense upgrade that we thought we anticipate seeing. And then all of a sudden, they just fall flat again. But this is what happens when you don't make an adjustment all throughout the second half. None. And the offense feels stagnant. There's more dinks and dunks. It drives you nuts. Justin Herbert deserves better than this. He deserves at least a coach who's competent enough to making the right calls. And by the way, Sean Payton, if he comes into this organization, you know who he's bringing with him? Oh, he's bringing with him Vic Fangio, who had a top-tier defense from Chicago and Denver. Maybe that might help a little more. And maybe getting a competent offensive coordinator who's not going to play scared majority of the time, who's not going to play this dink and dunk. Justin Herbert is a first-round talent. He could clearly sling the football from like 80-plus yards. He's right there on the same caliber as Patrick Mahomes. Why are you not utilizing his talents? And by the way, you have a really good offensive line. Dallas would love to have an offensive line like this. They would work with whatever they got. They got themselves the first round pick with Zion Johnson. They got Rashawn Slater. They had really hit a home run with Jamari Salyer, who was real good. And they could still build upon a really good offensive line. But this never lasts for long. Ask how Dak Prescott's working with that. Because we all know Dak is it's crazy. But I'm just fed up with it. It's so Charger-like. But joining me here up onto the show, he's big on Chargers football, has a podcast, of course, called Locked on Chargers. David Droegmeier, he is joining me. I know, David, I had to get this rant out because, like you and I've been a fan since I was 7 years old. Enough is enough. This is insanity. If I'm hitting the right points, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there was no second half adjustment. It seemed like they reverted back to the same thing that they have been through in the last, 2 years. Joe Lombardi's got to go. Brandon Staley's clearly off his skis. There was no other way of really explaining what we just saw from last night. Am I right?
Yeah. So as far as the first half was concerned, they were pretty dominant. Everything was working. It really didn't seem like there was anything that they didn't do, except for, I think the running numbers were a little bit smoke and mirrors because they were just efficient in the red zone. They didn't really, run the ball well at all the entire game. They ran for under 3 yards a carry, and that's a very stout defensive line that they were going up against. So, I think that was a little bit misleading. As far as Brandon Staley is concerned, I have to disagree with you. I don't think there's any way he's going to get fired. I think that if you look at the history of Chargers head coaches, the last 3 or 4 of them have at least got 4 seasons. And you also have to take into account the amount of injuries that the Chargers have had to deal with this season. Okay. Rashawn Slater got hurt in the third game, missed the entire season. Okay. Joey Bosa missed the majority of the season. Keenan Allen missed 9 games with a hamstring injury. There's a laundry list of different names that I can rattle off that was supposed to make a very intentional difference on how this season was going to run. Now, returning back to the second half of this game, the Chargers also dealing with injuries. One of the best corners that they had on the team, Michael Davis, left with an injury. And then obviously his replacement, Jasir Taylor, who was a 6th-round pick, got picked on, pun intended. I mean, they really went after him, and the Chargers did not get enough pressure. They really went to the quick game as far as the Jaguars offense is concerned. So you have to give them credit for that. And yeah, they collapsed, and that's what I put it on Twitter. It's just the biggest chargering of all time. It's just something that is impossible to fathom considering how that first half went. But you got to close things out in the NFL. I mean, that's the bottom line. You have to put games away. It felt like they had an opportunity to do that in the third quarter, and they couldn't get it done. So, yeah, it's devastating. It's going to be a horrendous offseason, incredibly long and painful, having to look back on the result of this game.
Yeah, and ultimately, because the last thing you want to do, and we've seen this from so many different quarterbacks, you don't want to end up wasting away the talent. Justin Herbert is just too damn good for that. Now, I made this point because I've heard all the heckles. A lot of people still tend to believe that Justin Herbert is overrated. Well, I just looked at the box score. I mean, Trevor Lawrence threw 4 picks last night and had to make it up by 4 touchdowns, and his quarterback rating was 70. Yeah. While Justin Herbert on the other side had 1 touchdown, no pick, and his quarterback rating was 84. You're trying to tell me he's overrated? But this is part of the narrative that Justin Herbert, no matter what happens around him, I mean, I get it. He'll get the criticism, but it's too harsh of the fact because he's inheriting a mess. So at the end, you got to get the right person to step in.
It's a team game. I can't understand why all of these people just single out the quarterback like they go out there and they play the game by themselves. They don't have receivers. They don't have running backs. They don't have they don't have linemen. They don't have anybody. They're just out there playing against the other quarterback one-on-one. That's such a lazy take. I can't resonate with that because there's so many other factors involved. Justin Herbert did his job. Okay. He protected the football. He made the throws that he needed to make. I mean, throughout this game, he did what he had to do to put the Chargers in position to win. The defense failed him. That is absolutely what happened in the second half of this game. If you get 1, maybe 2 stops in the second half, this game is a win for the Chargers, and we're talking about them moving on and probably taking on the Chiefs, depending on how the rest of Wild Card Weekend, works out. So the defense was the biggest problem, and I think that's one thing you have to look at going into this offseason is, man, are they going to be able to get better quality depth, or are they going to be able to fix these problems? I mean, this is going to be, if Brandon Staley continues on as head coach, will be the 3rd year in this defensive system, and there will literally be no more excuses as to the play on the field because, they've been atrocious stopping the run all year. They've been excellent against the pass, but you couldn't step up when it mattered the most, which was the playoffs. And so, I mean, a very interesting team to cover this year, a very good football team at times, a very puzzling football team at times, but the Chargers have work to do. Obviously, they couldn't finish it and get the job done.
Yeah, and so ultimately, it's right now to the point of, are you going to straighten this out, or should we at the very least find somebody who could really straighten it out in the right way possible? Because I mean, like I said, Justin Herbert deserves a lot more than just what he's getting from the performances of the critical coaching calls. Yeah. Yet at the same time, I mean, I will say this: I do put Joey Bosa on blast because I know that in playoff football, it's never easy because refs are going to swallow the whistle majority of the time.
He got held relentlessly in that game. It's ridiculous.
Very much. And I know it gets frustrating, but when you lose your cool twice in the middle of that, you now become the liability on the team. And you don't want to feel like that. It is hard. It's very, very hard. I know that those were calls should have been called Unfortunately, you got to kind of play through adversity. I mean, that's what's tough about the NFL. You got to be tougher than what the atmosphere around you is. So, I mean, at the end, everybody's got to straighten themselves out. Everybody's got to be the next guy to make the play. Because if you can do that and keep your cool, then it would have changed the narrative. Now, I will say this, because I said this during the time of the trade deadline. I was very surprised, though, that the Chargers couldn't possibly make a small, slight move that would have helped them in the wide receiving core. Because here's the thing, Keenan Allen, he's not getting any younger. And you're going to utilize a lot of his talents, but eventually you're going to want to start looking at something else. You're going to want to get somebody younger in there. I made a point. I thought they should have made a call to the Jets, knowing Denzel Mims wants to trade out. I mean, why not? You would have gotten a couple picks out of the way, but you would have got a young receiver, let him learn the system, and maybe he could work his way up, because Jalen Guyton was out for the season. Yeah. So it's like at times it's like whether they really want to pull the trigger or they don't. Now, let's hypothetically speak, though, because if they do go with Brandon Staley, you're right. There is no excuses. But come Monday morning, if in fact Staley gets that call, and then would that be time? Because as myself as a Charger fan, this has been ridiculous and enough is enough. Would that be that point that potentially you have got to get Sean Payton in this office? If it's, let's hypothetically speak on that.
Yeah. So if Brandon Staley got that call on Monday saying that he was fired after this season, then yeah, I think that there's no way that you couldn't connect those two together, because I think it's obvious that Sean Payton got interviews from the Broncos and got interviews from the Colts and whoever else. But let's be clear. We know he wants to coach in LA. Why wouldn't he? The Chargers have Justin Herbert, who is 24 years old. They have Keenan Allen. They have Mike Williams under contract, for multiple years. They have Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa under contract, and Derwin James under contract for multiple years. This is a very, very talented roster that could be a coach away. That is very, very easy to deduce. Now, knowing the Chargers organization and knowing that they are kind of cheap, they have that kind of stigma about them. I just don't know if they would be willing to, one, give him the $20 million per season that he's looking for, that he deserves because he is a Super Bowl winning coach, the autonomy to make those type of decisions that he wants to make, giving him kind of front office control, which the Chargers don't really do that. And not only that, but on top of that, have to provide draft compensation to the Saints in order to be able to get his rights. All three of those things are unprecedented things that the Chargers have never done, and it is very difficult for me to see that they would pull that trigger, even if they had that vacancy. Now, I will say the one situation that is most likely to occur, in my opinion, covering the team as closely as I do, Joe Lombardi is going to get fired. That's going to happen immediately. And I do think they are going to look for a different, more veteran type of offensive coordinator to pair with Brandon Staley. So maybe you get a little bit of a different experience there. And hey, a guy who got the boot or is looking for other opportunities has the last name of LaFleur. And I understand that the Chargers were looking at him to be an OC beforehand. And I think it's important to remember Joe Lombardi was not Brandon Staley's first pick at offensive coordinator. This is like his third choice. And that's ended up what happened. So I do think that Joe Lombardi gets fired and a different offensive coordinator gets put into place.
Yeah, because ultimately, I mean, you could see the difference in that offense. I mean, think about it. When they had Anthony Lynn and you had Shane Steichen as an offensive coordinator, at least he got the best of Justin Herbert to where he was breaking records his rookie year. On top of it, the run game seemed at least efficient, but no matter the injuries and such, it seemed like it was building for that plateau. But yeah, you got to have somebody who's willing to end up making that. I mean, hell, we've watched Ben Johnson in Detroit put up massive numbers with Jared Goff and he's got a really stacked wide receiver core. Now it is interesting because looking at the AFC West and what it's shaped to be, we know Denver's obviously looking for that right head coach, and it's obviously running through Kansas City. And then the Raiders now are looking for a new quarterback. So it's not like that the AFC West could not continuously build their competition around, because I mean they're just getting better every year. But from an outside perspective looking in, I mean, you got to find ways to beat Kansas City, because I guarantee you, if this narrative did not happen last night, they would have gone in to Kansas City for a third time, and I think they would have changed that narrative after that.
I agree.
It's quite possible, but now you look in next season, would Denver maybe get the right head coach to get Russell Wilson going? Or, the Raiders, would they get Tom Brady, or would they risk going and drafting a quarterback that can fit in this system? I mean, that's a lot to think about around in this division.
Well, for the Raiders, I mean, it's going to be a 1-year stopgap. I mean, if you do bring in Tom Brady, he's 45 years old, and Father Time is undefeated. I don't care who you are, even if you are Tom Brady. And honestly, I think if he loses today, I think he might actually call it a career. And I mean, he should have done it last year, if we're being completely honest. And we saw the reverberation of that particular decision and how that kind of affected him and his family. I'm not going to get too far into that because that sucks. But as far as the Broncos is concerned, honestly, I don't think that anyone's going to be able to come in and get the best of Russell Wilson, because I think Russell Wilson is going downhill. I don't think he has much left in the tank. And I don't think his teammates really like him very much. And just from an outsider's perspective, for me, following the Broncos as I've been following the Chargers, it just doesn't seem like Russ is a very authentic individual. It just doesn't seem like he's a real guy, and he is that same way all the time. So it just, and I think that's really hard for teammates and people like that to buy in, because they don't feel like he's being authentic. Right. And then when you're not going out there and performing at a $250 million level, like they paid him, and they traded an amazing amount of assets to acquire him, you were expecting a much, much better performance. And I mean, he's 33, 34. That's not particularly old for a quarterback, but for the type of quarterback that he's been in his career, that is old, because he is somewhat of a running quarterback. And is he going to be able to use that arm to be able to kind of change and really reestablish himself in a different way, playing quarterback a different way, and be successful? That's going to be what I'm going to be watching out for. Now, I will say that ownership group, I mean, hey, that's Walmart. Okay. They got Walmart money. All right. So they got a lot of resources, and they can really throw their money around to get whatever type of coach, whatever type of players that they want within the constraints of that salary cap, of course. But I think if I had to pick, I would say the Broncos are probably someone to be a little bit wary of, more so than the Raiders, because if you don't have a quarterback, then you really don't have any kind of team.
Yeah, and how I would have pointed this out, because I explained this on my show a couple weeks ago, and I said I think the best fits, because of the scenario that the Broncos are in. I feel like Shane Steichen could be a fit. Frank Reich could possibly be a fit, because even being a quarterback whisperer, I mean, he's got a great pedigree. He's worked with a lot of quarterbacks. Sure. So even working with Russ, get him slightly moving, but yet still utilizing the same he had in Seattle, it could work. But I said this, I'm like, if it were me getting draft capital, I would have traded Jerry Jeudy to at the very least get stuff back, because you're getting Tim Patrick back next year, and you got a real good receiving core. You could even draft another one. I mean, that
but Patrick and Sutton are very close to each other. They're very similar type of players, and Jerry Jeudy is explosive. When he gets the ball in his hands, he can really take off. And I don't know if there's another player on that offense that can replicate that type of success. So if I were them, I would keep Jeudy and trade one of their other receivers.
Yeah, and even for the Raiders, because ultimately we all know the tenure from Josh McDaniels in Denver. Has he really learned a whole lot? Yeah.
Doesn't seem like it.
Yeah, and so in the end, like I said this, and even for Raider fans, like are you sure you're going to go through 20 more quarterbacks to find your franchise quarterback again? Because it just seems like we're just going back to Rich Gannon again.
Oh, yeah.
Like it doesn't make any types of sense. Now, you could bring in that quarterback and maybe potentially draft one if you could, but at the end, it's just like you're kind of swinging with your hands tied, and that's where they sit at this point. So in the off season, there's a lot to really do for as far as work-wise with it. But how do you perceive that the Chargers in the offseason, knowing from what offense and defense had produced, what now seems to be they've got to focus on this point in the football? I know run defense is a big thing that they have to adjust. And I think maybe at some point they got to start kind of setting themselves for like reserving, maybe potentially starting to get some wide receivers in there at some point.
Absolutely. There's no question about it. So when you look at the kind of the off-season schedule, you would say for the Chargers, the one thing you have to consider is unfortunately that they're cap strapped. They spent a lot of their money last season. Now with the new TV deals coming out, I do believe there will be an adjustment to the cap that they'll see a pretty big surplus in that will change. And so there will be some money to kind of spread around, but they're going to have to restructure some contracts, I feel like, but they need to put some money into that defensive line, some more money. They brought in Austin Johnson and Sebastian Joseph Day to shore that up, but unfortunately Austin Johnson got hurt and Sebastian Joseph Day did admirably, but he was playing basically by himself on that defensive line. And I'll give a shout out to Braden Fehoko too. I feel like he did a really good job towards the back end of the season to try to provide some of that, run stopping power, if you will. But they need to add a speed wide receiver, which I have been clamoring for since the draft last year. I mean, I like Zion Johnson, don't get me wrong, but for them to go through that entire draft and not even take a swing at a speed receiver was a travesty to me. It was an absolute miss and something I still don't understand to this day. And I agree with you, at the trade deadline, they could have took another shot. Because if you were all in, like your decisions that you made in the offseason indicated that you were, that's a move that you would have made. And it would have been not even a second thought. But that's the number one on my list. But I want to see them get that in the draft. I really do feel like that's the best place to do it, especially with the limited amount of money that they're going to be working with. So on offense, you better get a speed receiver. And I honestly wouldn't mind them getting a playmaking tight end as well. I feel like Hunter Henry was a great mix with Justin Herbert that first year, but that didn't really get the chance to materialize because he left and went to the Patriots and he's barely getting used over there. I mean, I don't really understand that move from his perspective, and on defense, it's all about shoring up that run defense. Cause I do like the corners on the outside. I feel like they played extremely well. Hopefully JC Jackson comes back and he's somewhat close to himself, because he never really got comfortable in this defense. And I don't know if he was ever really healthy at any point as well. Feel like he was really trying to work his way back through that, but it's all about stopping the run on offense and getting the ball down the field and really utilizing that rocket arm that Justin Herbert possesses. You saw when Jalen Guyton was out there, how effective that can be, just stretching the field. It changes the dynamic of the offense. And obviously that's not hard to see. So stop the run on defense, get down the field on offense. That should be part of the game plan for the Chargers going into this offseason.
It's funny because, and I don't know if you noticed it, but I think a lot of us, we were very surprised because even from last year, I mean, you had last year's preseason where Tyron Johnson was just going off. Yeah. And I was very surprised that first they cut him. He goes and signs with different teams. And they didn't inquire about possibly bringing him back on a practice squad contract to work his way to get back into that portion. I mean, that could have honestly helped even with Jalen Guyton out for the season.
From what I heard about the Tyron Johnson situation is that he didn't really pick up the offense at the level that they wanted him to pick it up. They didn't feel like he understood things the way that they were trying to execute it. And that's why they didn't bring him in. And that's why they didn't bring him in at any point after they cut him. So I think that's the major reason why. And for me, I'm like, I don't care if you don't understand the offense. I'm telling you to do one thing. Run as fast as you possibly can down the football field and expect the ball. I don't care if you understand all of the blocking concepts. That's not what I'm bringing you in here for. You're not a blocker. You're a speed demon that I'm trying to weaponize for this offense, like, the Chargers did in the past. But I mean, obviously there are a lot more that goes into being a NFL football player than just running down the field. I mean, there are certain expectations and requirements that, they want you to be able to do. And unfortunately, Tyron Johnson was not able to perform those tasks at an adequate level for them.
Yeah, and I mean, even in this league, because of being quarterback centric, it's not like you can never not have enough offensive weapons in this time,
Exactly.
and the way that it's been shifting. But, hopefully by the end of the night, I mean, I know it's obviously going to be a big time recovery for a lot of Charger fans and for a lot of the Chargers fan base.
Yeah.
But, work's got to get done. That's ultimately what has to be put in place. And you've got to hope that everything matches the way that it should, because again, Kansas City, we all know that we're tired of hearing a lot of their hecklers. We know that, the competition with Joe Burrow and Josh Allen and a lot of these guys, it's only getting bigger and better from here. I mean, we're going to be watching some of these games, and you're going to see of those three that know that in the AFC, there's a lot that you got to kind of run past in order to be the best of the best. Yeah. So hopefully they talk some sense in themselves, and maybe they can get themselves back into where they want to be. But I appreciate it, David. It's so good talking, man. And especially with a lot of, I had to find at least a lot of people that knowledgeable on Charger stuff, like myself included. I mean, just to get me up onto the show. So where can people find your podcast and a lot of your content on social media?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at DroTalkSD. That's I tweet a lot, especially about the Chargers, obviously. Also talk about some baseball as well, some WWE on occasion. But yeah, I'm mostly a football guy. And then, of course, you can find the show. The show's Twitter, Locked On LAC. Also on every audio platform that you can imagine, your Apple Music, your Spotify, TuneIn. It doesn't matter. We're everywhere. And on video on our YouTube channel, Locked On Chargers.
Well, there you go, folks. I'm definitely going to be locked in on it on all off season and going into 2023. So thank you so much, David. Appreciate your time. Have a great weekend. And hell, if you got the day off the next day, MLK Day, I'd love to have at least an extra Monday. So take care of yourself, recover this well, and let's hope that the Chargers get back into business and hopefully better than before.
Thank you for having me, man. Have a good one. Take care.
Thanks. Yeah, this is one of those things that you just, no matter how you could have wrote this narrative, you could not, you couldn't put it all together on paper. Like you can't. Brandon Staley, like I will say this, and I'm not trying to knock, I am not trying to knock on what Brandon Staley, what he can do, and yet what he can't do. I am very critical when it comes to the play calling, the crucial situational plays, and how are you walking in to what the season, and especially in the postseason, because it gets harder from here on out. It's not one of those easy walk in the park types. There is a lot to playoff football than a lot of people tend to think. So it is pretty tough. I'm not gonna lie. And when you just get this type of play, now remember, Doug Peterson, I mean, he's won a Super Bowl in the past. Trevor Lawrence looks a lot better, but last night that was all Chargers shooting themselves in the foot and not recovering from a dominant first half. I mean, that there was no adjustments, and the offense felt like they disappeared. The defense was absolutely a liability. And I know that there were a lot of atrocious calls, but I mean, I will put it to you this way. How many times have we seen James Harden obviously look at the referees, look at Scott Foster and ask for a foul? We've watched it several times. I know it gets tough, but hey, this is what playoffs is all about. You've got to work hard to get past adversity. That's the way that it is. They're going to try to control the game as much as they possibly can. It's outsmarting the game. That's what it comes down to. And when you've got guys losing their cool, you got a lot of the players that, and I know that they play hard. I'm not knocking on them at all for the way that things have played out, but sometimes you just got to shake certain things off and be ready for the next task at hand, because that's where it's going to be the important part in what determines the year. So I don't know. I just think that this is going to be one of those things. The Chargers and Dean Spanos really has to get right, because if he can't, I don't know. I've said it over and over again. I feel like Spanos has to sell the team, because this is not, the fans deserve better than this. Justin Herbert deserves better than this. And you couldn't write it all over the wall any better than what last night gave you. So I do want to end up shifting on a couple of topics here as well. Because I just think there is, hold on a second. There we go. And one thing I will tell you this. So I do want to shift the narrative to the New York Giants. We're going to see them today. I think the Giants, and this is what the Chargers should honestly look at when it comes to Brian Daboll. Daboll is very situationally smart. Runs the football real efficiently. I mean, Saquon Barkley is having a heck of a year. Finally, fully 110% healthy. So this is the Saquon we knew we'd find out of Penn State. I think he's going to be really good. But the Giants, it's going to be interesting walking into the postseason against Minnesota, because here's the thing. I took the Giants to beat Minnesota, have them cover on the +3, and watching this team, the coaching match, because both of them are first-time playoff head coaches. Now, Brian Daboll, who's been the big-time journeyman all around the NFL, he knows how to work with certain offenses, and he knows how to work with the pieces he has. I think this will be an interesting game, but I feel like Minnesota's defense has kind of been exposed for quite some weeks. And to see them in their part, knowing Kirk Cousins in a big-time game, I mean, you got to perform. You got to perform at the highest level. Now, as I've said before, if he cannot get the job done, Derek Carr's out there. He's out there, and you can make a deal. You can make a case for this, because I feel like Minnesota, you don't want to waste away that offense either. And the defense has to get better. I thought, Zadarius Smith was a real good pickup. Harrison Smith's a real good player, and Patrick Peterson, and even Eric Kendricks. So there is potential for what the Vikings have, but at times, I mean, we watched this against Green Bay. There were situational plays. Minnesota couldn't execute. And all it takes is just that much for the Giants to outsmart the Vikings. And I feel like that they could possibly do it. It's just one of those games, you're just walking in, and the narrative is you feel like the Giants are going to be running majority of the time with the football. And then when it comes to situational throws, all you're asking is Daniel Jones to make those throws. That's it. All right. I do want to talk about this as well. I know that we're kind of getting close to the end from here. But the NHL All-Star coaches have officially been announced. Now, you have Rod Brindamore from the Carolina Hurricanes representing for the Metropolitan Division. You also have Bruce Cassidy representing the Pacific Division. Then there's the coach from Boston who's representing the Atlantic. And then there is Pete DeBour representing the Central. I will tell you this, because living here in my entire life in Las Vegas, because I've heard the narrative about Pete DeBour by the time he was hired in Vegas and when he was fired. Pete DeBour is not a terrible coach. If you think about it, because the Vegas Golden Knights have now had 3 top-tier coaches since the start of the franchise. They had Gerard Gallant, hyper-aggressive, was very fast on offense, and at times was big on puck and go scenarios. Now, those would be fine on certain situations, but you can't leave yourself open to where the defense starts to crumble and the offense just can't get rolling, or they mismatch, or they misplay, and then they're a step behind. Pete DeBour, defensive coach, understands exactly, like, when it comes to, you got to have a strengthening defense. I mean, hell, San Jose had a real good defense when they first ended up getting Erik Karlsson. They had Mark-Edouard Vlasic. They had Justin Braun at the time before he went to Philly. And there were a couple of real good pieces, but he was big on defense. And all it took was, you got to have the right offensive pieces in order for them to score goals, or at least get more shots on goals to be aggressive. And then they go and hire Bruce Cassidy. And the Golden Knights right now are a really good-looking team. And I know that coming into this was what Bruce Cassidy was going to be. He was going to be that type of head coach that was going to hold everybody to a certain accountability. And everybody has to step up. And man, there's competition everywhere around. Edmonton, Calgary, Los Angeles, Seattle is starting to get better, but even for the Central. But this is what I thought of. When Dallas was looking for a head coach, what do they have? They've got Miro Heiskanen. They got a real good defensive rapport. Plus, they've even got real good offensive guys like Jason Robertson, who's having a hell of a year. Tyler Seguin, Jamie Benn. They have several really good players. Dallas is not terrible. They could play. And so bringing in a mind like Pete DeBour was only going to make the defense a lot better. And by the way, Jake Oettinger and their backup goaltender, they're already at a goals against average at like literally 250, if not lower. So, and you're bringing in somebody, and this is what they found hard to believe. I never thought Pete DeBour was a terrible coach at all. I even went on the air speaking about this, and I said, Pete DeBour has been to 2 Stanley Cups. I know he's lost both of them, but he can turn a lot of the narratives for teams that he has represented. I mean, you had Carolina at one point, you had, you had New Jersey, and then San Jose, you make all the way to the Stanley Cup final, then the Vegas Golden Knights, and they made it into the Western Conference Finals like twice from his tenure. And then you go into Dallas, and right now they're the best team in the Western Conference. Now, I don't think they'll stand there for very long because the Golden Knights are on fire, the Kings are playing real good hockey, and then so is Seattle creeping in. Now, the question is, could Colorado possibly recover themselves from what they had from last season? I don't know. I mean, injuries have been playing a big role. I still do think Colorado is a tough team. I mean, Jared Bednar, real good coach. I don't think there's any question whatsoever that he will refigure this out. But Pete DeBour, people seem to write him off really easily. But I know what they were getting. Goaltending was going to be exceptional. Jake Oettinger is having a great year. I mean, next to Logan Thompson this year, great year in the Western Conference. Defense is playing real good. I mean, hell, they moved on from John Klingberg, who is a real good top-tier defender. And they've got Miro Heiskanen, who's now setting the tone in his prime. And then Jason Robertson, real good offense. They are going to end up focusing and shifting more of their focus on offense. Because at some point, I mean, you've got Tyler Seguin getting up. You've got Jamie Benn at some point down the stretch. He's getting up there. And so you got to find the next big thing on offense, or even drafting the next big thing on offense. But all these all-star coaches, I mean, Rod Brindamore was a former Cane, knows the Canes organization. And Bruce Cassidy, he's great. He's a great asset when it comes to young, up-and-coming talents. That's why you see the Golden Knights playing the way that they are. And he's tough on everybody. He's even tough on the veterans because there is a task at hand. And then, I mean, Boston came out of the woodworks just swinging. And I had question marks about them. But it turns out they're playing just fine. They're not having any flaws to what anywhere from on the lines and on from defense and goaltending. They are exceptionally good. But anybody that can see Pete DeBour and where he's at right now, I mean, he could definitely turn this Dallas franchise around. I mean, they did get to the Stanley Cup final a couple years ago and played on what role? Defense. And we're big-time defense walking into the Stanley Cup playoffs, and they certainly kept that narrative all the way down the stretch. So that's what they're big on. They're big on defense. They love to play really good situational hockey. And when it comes to opportunities, you got to have everybody who is going to be executing those plays and are going to be exceptionally well. So that's where I'm at. I mean, he's not a bad coach. Dallas apparently seems to be playing really good. So that's going to do it here for my time on the Snake Sports Talk Show. I appreciate everybody who had came in. David Droegmeier, who came in earlier, talking a lot about Chargers talk. And, we had a fun time with that as well. If you haven't done so already, like, subscribe, hit the bell button for all latest notifications on everything Snake Sports Talk Show, future and past shows to keep you up to date. iHeartRadio, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, and Instagram is where you can like and follow. I appreciate every one of you guys, and I appreciate you all coming on onto the show. Have a great rest of the weekend, and let's see how the rest of the playoffs really, really favor out. So have a good weekend, enjoy yourselves, and we will see you on the next edition of the Snake Sports Talk Show.